Hello again. I say hello again because I was with the board earlier, and there are a few folks that are joining us. I'm first and on this panel, and so the federal government perspective can be a little bit up there in terms of the sky, and I will be followed, of course, by my esteemed colleagues who will get more concrete and talk about some of the state issues. And local issues. I want to thank you all for coming to Washington again. I don't know if I will take my full 12 minutes since I really want to hear from my esteemed colleagues. And I will also be tag teaming with my colleague Keith Takata because I have to step out for an hour in between when I see you again at 5 o'clock. You all know all the statistics about the border region and obviously the importance of the border region. And we continue to see the environmental challenges on the border region, whether it's environmental health issues with drinking water and sanitation, serious air quality problems, and improper management of hazardous waste and chemicals. From our data, and from data that we have with other members of the federal family, we still see those persistent health issues. The high asthma rates, the high chemical exposure, childhood obesity, and diabetes. And we recognize that these problems are complex and they're varied. But as you heard from my fearless leader, one of my fearless leaders, Deputy Administrator Bob Petrosepi, EPA is still at work, and we're working with our partners to be able to help improve human health and the environment. So we recognize in order to clean up the air, we need to clean up the fuel that we use to produce the energy and the electricity that keeps the schools and the homes and the businesses running. So in terms of renewable energy, I really want to thank the board members for this excellent document. I did skim through it, and I intend on reading it when I get on the plane tomorrow so that I can know and benefit from all of the information that you provided to us on the report in the border region. So energy and the environment go hand in hand, and it's an enormous proportion of the Earth's environmental issues that arise out of energy use. And we are looking for and hoping to partner to be able to reduce those negative environmental impacts, whether it's from renewable energy sources that reduce the amount of oil and coal mining that's necessary, or renewable energy sources that can avoid or reduce negative environmental impacts and risks from fossil fuel energy production, and can help conserve fossil resources for the future, and also to renewable reductions in air emissions, water consumption, water pollution, waste, noise, and adverse land use impacts. So some of the health benefits that we intend on working towards with our partners in this room and others. Renewables remove pollution that aggravates asthma, which is the #1 children's health problem. And you know that in terms of the Border 2020 program, one of our foundational aspects that we'll be working on is children's environmental health. This kind of pollution has been linked to lung cancer and allergies. Air pollution causes diseases and even premature death among vulnerable populations, including children, the elderly, and people with lung disease. And our administrator, Lisa P. Jackson, has linked very strongly children's environmental health to issues of environmental justice. Renewable energy can both supply a significant proportion of energy needs and increase fuel diversity, national security, and regional economic development benefits. So in the Border 2020 recommendations that have been made to me as one of the national coordinators, the types of potential project assistance under AIR include border-wide efficiency and/or biomass projects, such as methane capture from landfills, and working with border financing institutions, such as the NAD Bank, to help fund regional alternative sources of energy via certification through the BEC. Border infrastructure needs impact border residents' quality of life. The problem is particularly severe in many Mexican communities where infrastructure systems are often inadequate or non-existent. In the U.S., most of the environmental needs involve colonias, the rural unincorporated subdivisions, characterized by substandard housing, poor roads and drainage, and inadequate water and sewer facilities. The basic sectors that need the most attention are potable water, wastewater collection, wastewater treatment, air quality, and management of municipal solid waste. The good news is that EPA is already committed to work and to put resources to water infrastructure on the border. I have to actually point out Randy Hill, who's sitting there in the corner, who is with our Office of Water and is responsible for the border infrastructure water programs. EPA U.S.-Mexico Border Infrastructure Program has offered the greatest investment and leveraging tools for successful basic service infrastructure development in the border region. Still, additional drinking water and wastewater infrastructure needs continue to be identified and far surpass available program resources. You know that. We know it too. In 1997, EPA made its first awards to the BEC and the NAD Bank for the development and construction of high-priority water and wastewater infrastructure for underserved communities in the U.S.-Mexico border region. Since then, that program has been instrumental in identifying and addressing the drinking water and wastewater infrastructure needs in border communities. From its inception in fiscal year 11, the program has completed 78 projects. These projects provided more than 54,000 homes with first-time access to safe drinking water and 513,000 homes with first-time access to wastewater collection and treatment systems. While these numbers reflect the success of the program, there is a remaining need in the border communities that needs to be addressed. The program's fiscal year 11-12 funding solicitation resulted in 200 project applications with an estimated total construction of $800 million. Through EPA's prioritization process, 23 of these projects have been selected as candidates to receive funding for planning and development. As construction funds become available, EPA will fund those projects that address the most urgent public health and environmental needs. So we're facing the challenge of continuing to address the critical drinking water and wastewater needs in the border region, while overall program funding levels are declining. In response to this challenge, EPA is strengthening partnerships, there's that word again, leveraging resources, and implementing program efficiencies to maximize available funds. Providing first-time drinking water and wastewater infrastructure in the border region does remain a very high priority for the agency. And as you can see, work on the border is an opportunity. We see it as an opportunity, and thank you for a few moments to be able to address the issues of your report. Thank you.
Michelle, thank you very much. I was particularly happy to hear you talk about the public health dimensions of the environment. In many parts of the world, including in certain areas of Mexico, the best way to raise awareness about environmental issues is actually to link it directly to public health, because it's something that hits directly, in people's lives. Everybody knows somebody who's asthmatic, who has problems in that regard. And when you begin to see, particularly in a city like Mexico City where I live, the impact of poor air quality on public health, particularly of vulnerable populations like children and old people, it's remarkably, it hits home immediately. So thank you very much for doing that. I'm going to change around the order a little bit, if that's okay with the people on the board, just so we can go from left to right, or as you're looking at right to left. So I'm actually going to pass the word over to Steve Niemeyer, if I may. Stephen, I've known now for just over a year, I guess, because I met him this time last year at the presentation of the previous report. And Steve is the Border Affairs Manager and Colonias Coordinator for the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. Steve, I'll hand you over the microphone.
Thank you. And I appreciate it very much. I want to thank the Woodrow Wilson Center for having me, and someone at GNEB for asking me to speak. I don't know who it was, but I noticed in my bio it says I have in-depth knowledge of the environment along the Texas-Mexico border. It's actually the U.S.-Mexico border, and we say the Texas-Mexico portion of the U.S.-Mexico border because Texas is not a country. We used to be, and our Mexican colleagues are very sensitive of that, so we try to be sensitive to that. And I will tell you too that I don't have in-depth knowledge. I've been around a long time, and so people think I know a lot. And there's an expression in Spanish, "Más sabe el diablo por viejo que por diablo," which means the devil knows more because he's old than because he's the devil. And that's kind of how I am. I've been around a while. I'll just tell you a couple of things. I just have some very brief remarks. I was asked to speak about the state perspective on this report. And first, I want to recognize my fellow board members who are here, and especially my state colleagues, Tom Ruiz, Veronica Garcia, who couldn't make it from Arizona. Tom's with New Mexico Environment Department, and Jose Angel, who's representing the state of California. And this was a really terrific report. I think especially, I forgot, I also want to thank the staff at OFACMO, including Mark Joyce, Anne Marie Gantner, Stephanie McCoy, and Diane Austin, our chair, for really pulling this report together, and Mary Spock with a scientific consulting group, because in September we basically rewrote much of this report. So 2 months ago this report was not done, and it took a lot of work to get us here. And when you look at this report, you're going, wow, what an awesome report. Maria Elena told me, yeah, she glanced at it and read it, and she said, man, this is a great report. And I thought, wow, and it really is. So sometimes you impress even yourself. I will just tell you that looking at the report, and I was asked to give a state perspective, and I very briefly consulted with my state folks or colleagues, or tried to. Maybe that's a more accurate phrase. But if you look at the report, states have been leaders in renewable energy. And it was through the states implementing of, what do you call it, RPSs, our portfolio standards, renewable portfolio standards, that we developed all these different, what do you call it, abilities to excel in renewable energy along the border. California is a leader in geothermal energy. Texas, we're a leader in wind power. We brought online 1 gigawatt of wind power a couple of years ago in 1 year, which is hadn't been done before. New Mexico created the Renewable Energy Transmission Authority, and Robert Apodaca is also on the board of that. That's just to figure out where to put the transmission lines. I mean, how visionary is that? And all 4 states are in the top 10 for solar power. So that goes to show you that this is something that was done at the state level as a state initiative. And I say that because we did that without any real impetus from the federal government. In fact, these were a lot of times, I know in Texas, it was done by the legislature. State leaders said, we need to do this, and we did it for the benefit of the residents of our states. We did it without federal impetus or intervention. And that just goes to, I'll just follow up, and I'm going to make my remarks real brief because those of you who know me know I'm a man of few words. And so you guys know me well. Okay, good. and one of our recommendations, it's our last recommendation, was that the federal government develop better collaboration and coordination. And this has been commented on several times. Nancy Sutley mentioned it. Bob Persisepi mentioned it. Michelle DePass mentioned it. And I told Michelle this is one of the highlights of my career is being on a panel with Michelle DePass. So I just wanted to restate that. But you know, we first did that recommendation, and it was crafted to say the federal government should lead the states in border renewable energy. And then we thought better of it, and we said, you know what? I mean, we've done all this without the federal government's help. We need to retool this recommendation. So that's what we came out with, to develop better collaboration, coordination between state, local, and other partners. And that's the thing that's important. I think there's still some things that can be done to make things better when it comes to renewable energy, but and the federal government has a role to play there, but a lot of this stuff was done at the state level. And that's sort of what I wanted to highlight. Finally, I want to just remind you guys that Texas, we're an environmental leader. And beginning in February, we have the first law to disclose chemicals used in fracking. And another case where we're a leader, an environmental leader. And if you go to my agency's homepage, if you're wondering about shale, somebody mentioned shale usage earlier, you can go, we've got a webpage about the Barnett Shale Formation in the Dallas-Fort Worth region. You can find out if there's a producing well and how far it is from your house or from your Little League neighborhood field. You can figure out to the nearest foot how far that is. And that was done basically to respond not to the federal government, but because state leaders wanted to know, they were concerned about the environment. So we acted in that manner. And I think that just that's just one example of how states respond to their core constituencies. That's it. Thank you very much. But I just want to say that states, what is it? We have a lot to say. And I'm going to stop.
Steve, thank you very much. I'd just like to reiterate that. I mean, the level of responsiveness at the local level, I think, is something that needs to be brought into all of these calculations, and also the ability to get things done, which is what we've seen, I think, from the federal government, particularly in the U.S. over the past few years, is that the ability to actually make progress on many of these issues is restricted by political considerations, by other concerns, and we see the same kind of thing mirrored in Mexico as well. Unfortunately, as I was saying with Cecilia earlier on, you know, the responsibility and the power to do things in Mexico is so centralized that we actually, I think, need to consider decentralizing that more to the states. Whether or not it's going to happen is another issue. We'll move over now to Nathan Small, who is the Conservation Coordinator with the New Mexico Wilderness Alliance. Nathan?
Thank you very much, Duncan, and I would echo all of the thank yous from Steve. I can't replicate his humor, but his thank yous are very well deserved, starting, of course, with the Wilson Center, extending to the staff with EPA that has made being a part of the Good Neighbor Environmental Board easy, fun, illuminating, and hopefully most importantly, important and valuable to the national conversation on energy. So thank you all again for the honor of being here. It really is humbling to serve with so many distinguished board members and having gotten to know folks. To get right down to it, I believe kind of start with a little bit of my summary of the report and then talk about some of the local perspective. We need to seize borderland renewable energy opportunities. They're basking in the sun, swaying in great wind in some of our borderland states, bubbling up in the algae ponds and landfills, in the dairies, in multiple areas that are scattered throughout the borderland. I believe the 14th annual Good Neighbor Environmental Board report really showcases successful initiatives, as was discussed by Steve, oftentimes at the state level, that have taken advantage of some of these opportunities. It serves as a roadmap for continued investments and greater returns in borderland renewable energy initiatives, but it also serves as a warning against abandoning some of the same policies that have spurred these great leaps forward that, again, have occurred primarily at the state level. And we should not forget that these policies have spurred very strong economic gains, some of which we can kind of discuss as specific examples, in the midst of the worst economic difficulties that certainly I have ever experienced and many in our country have. I believe the report is an equally strong roadmap for the application of best practices and genuine stakeholder collaboration in the development of borderland renewable energy resources. The GNEB did not hesitate to detail the many costs associated with different forms of renewable energy development, and whether these costs are going to be borne by the surrounding environment, human or wildlife populations, or a combination of all three. The 14th report lays out numerous areas where federal contributions are critical to solving key questions and challenges facing renewable energy development. Depending on their difficulty, many of these areas might be considered quote-unquote low-hanging fruit, and they've been discussed at length already. Certainly coordinating federal land management, because so many of the especially industrial scale applications of renewable energy and certainly the transmission of renewable energy will have to take place on federal lands, and there's many advantages to that. And I think we have some good examples. The solar energy zones that were discussed in Las Cruces, we've seen that process go from these very large circles on maps that frankly frighten many different constituencies as to the potential for development on tens of thousands of acres, winnow themselves down through a very public process to where there's now one solar enterprise zone within Doña Ana County. Board was fortunate enough to be able to see it. It is appropriate. It's a flat piece of land, very much less diverse biologically than surrounding pieces of land. Several other parcels that had been targeted were taken out and winnowed out through this public participation process. So I think that's a check mark to be added in there for this idea of public collaboration, agency coordination, and something to build upon. And that's, of course, pre-screening the optimal sites with the fewest conflicts and or the largest benefits. The effective outreach and dissemination of technical resources for communities should be considered another area of low-hanging fruit. Speaking as the re-elected, I always have to say that now for at least another. Get me through 2011 and we'll be done with that. But for the second largest city in New Mexico, when we were in 2007, we were about to embark on building a new city hall where not only was there no renewable energy, there wasn't even consideration to the building of conduit and other basic blueprint changes, minor changes, in, building a larger utility closet to allow for the expansion of renewable energy at some point later on. And this is for a city that was doing very well financially, by all accounts did and still does have its ducks in a row. So the lack of, I think, technical expertise there is only magnified as you go to other smaller communities that are incorporated and certainly to unincorporated areas. EPA, I was just looking at it last night, discusses the RPS, Renewable Portfolio Standards, for states and have technical resources, as does NREL, as do many different federal agencies. And I think continued striving to effectively present those resources to local communities in the borderland and to the non-governmental agencies, whether they're chambers of commerce or others, there's a very big demand to show value these days to constituents, whether it's business members, whether it's citizens. So I see it, and I think the board sees that as a potential value that the federal government can offer and which would be readily accepted by many different communities. And be great, just to take a quick sidebar, EPA sometimes gets pigeonholed as this sink of regulations, and certainly that's a big part of what they do, but they do an incredible amount of proactive planning and outreach to communities. And wouldn't be nice if folks in the borderland began to see EPA and other agencies, but especially EPA, in a positive light as folks who are coming out not to enact an order or issue a decree, but to give technical information and help build something in their community. So picking, eating, enjoying these quote-unquote, again, low-hanging fruit, I think we can kind of look at the analogy that it energizes us, that us being the borderland and ultimately the nation, to see the benefits of renewable energy. I think the report does an excellent job of detailing many of the costs, but also going a step further when you talk about things like subsidies, pointing out that subsidies have been in place for decades for fossil fuels and at very high levels for the nuclear industry. It's neither bad nor good. It's just the discussion. I think it was an honest discussion in the report, to which I commend the entire board. And that lets us have a real public conversation about where we want to invest in and what we want to subsidize and to move forward. I think, again, if we take advantage of these low-hanging fruit, we will build a foundation, and in the report mentioned numerous times, I'll close with this, I know there's a lot to do, but above all else and above all the technical coordination, above the many good individual or state-based efforts, the renewable portfolio standards have been the biggest single driver of renewable energy, economic activity, economic growth, environmental gain in the borderland. Perhaps the nation, if these low-hanging fruit and if the borderland serves as a solid, good example for what renewable energy development in a efficient and motivated yet cautious and considered manner can do, the nation could take a step towards something like an RPS. Because as we start to look at how this emanates out throughout the rest of the United States, some of these big steps might be very necessary down the road. I would suggest perhaps we're not ready for an RPS as a nation, not only in the political sense, but we don't have the transmission capability. We're just now, in Robert's work and others, Jeremy Turner with the Renewable Energy Transmission Authority with RETA, that's laying the foundation. So a big picture way that I look at it also from a local government perspective is that this is laying a foundation that can then be a very solid one from which to build not only in the borderland but for the nation. I will save my examples for questions, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Nathan. One thing that I'd like to pull out from what you just said is about leadership. We talked about leadership by the states, but leadership by a municipality, leadership by a city hall is crucial. And Maria Elena has some experience in this herself, I know. But by setting an example is a particularly powerful form of leadership, particularly in a high-profile building such as that. But if you just create an old-style 20th century building, people are going to look at it and say, everything's fine. You all of a sudden put some solar panel in a prominent place, and you incorporate it into the architecture of the building so it doesn't look ridiculous, then all of a sudden people say, you can do this. Mm-hmm. And it stands there almost as a beacon for the rest of the community. And the other point about subsidies, I think it's crucial that the standard comeback when we begin to get enthusiastic about renewable energies is that people say, well, yeah, but that relies on so many subsidies. Absolutely right now. But so does every other form of energy that we've been producing for the last 150 years. So, let's create, in some senses, a level playing field in those terms. I'm now going to pass over the microphone to Robert Apodaca, who is the Assistant Chief West for the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Robert?
Thank you. Is this on? Can you guys hear me? Yes. Okay. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm a native New Mexican, born and raised in New Mexico, worked on the board for many years. It's a great opportunity to serve on this board. Thank you, Cynthia and Diane and the rest of the board members for everything, especially the staff for putting all this together. But as we move forward on, with the 14th report and we talk about renewable energy, I think one thing that all of us can probably agree on in this room, and Steve, is that that renewable energy presents a huge opportunity for the United States and reducing our dependency on foreign oils. Over the last couple of years, we've seen increases in gas prices and energy costs that have been passed down to all of our families, had huge impacts. I know in New Mexico and throughout a lot of our border communities. I'm going to talk about some of the things I'm going to mention are probably going to hit upon some of the things that Ms. Sully had also talked about earlier. When you look at the United States holding about 2% of the oil reserves, but we utilize about 25% of the oil. That's huge. That equates to approximately, I think it's 11 million barrels of oil that we use that are imported from foreign countries. So when you look at back in the 1980s, the United States was a leader in, I think, in wind capacity and solar capacity. If you look at what's happening today, you have China and you have Germany that they dominate, and they have the wind capacity and the solar capacity. And we, from the federal perspective, I think the administration is looking at how can we become competitive again on in these areas. How can we reestablish ourselves in the renewable energy, whether it's wind, solar, geothermal, biofuels, so on and so forth. So, as one of the major points that the president has been focusing on throughout this term is, what do we need to do to reduce our dependency on foreign oil, on foreign oil, having to import it. I think one of the major pledges that the president has made is, how does America reduce its imports by 1/3 by 2025? And the administration is also looking at how can we be aggressive in developing some of those renewable resources and cleaner fuels that can help us build a strong economy as we move forward. Over the past 3 years, the administration has been very successful and been very aggressive in the way that it looks at promoting renewable energy in the United States and along the border region. A couple of projects that I want to mention just very briefly, because I think it helps us to give a perspective of what's actually happening. And these are in our backyard, but as Steve and Nathan indicated, I sit on the Renewable Energy Transmission Authority. The authority is responsible for some of the transmission issues, throughout New Mexico. Duncan had mentioned earlier that the transmission is one of the biggest obstacles in actually moving renewable energy forward. One of the projects that we are embarking on right now, and it's actually moving very well. It's going to be a project that you want to probably keep your eye on, but the transmission project in New Mexico, it's going to be a 185 mile transmission line. The project will transmit about between 1,000 and 1,200 megawatts from central New Mexico to the Four Corners region. We're looking at an economic impact of about $3 billion in wind farm development, which equates to we're looking at about 1,500 construction jobs and about 150 permanent ongoing jobs on wind farms alone. When you look at the actual line that's going to be constructed, we're talking about another $400 million that'll be invested, an additional 200 construction jobs, and between 30 to 50 full-time permanent positions. So these are real projects. These are real jobs. You go down to Las Cruces area, and the board members had the opportunity to take a tour of Sapphire Energy. I talked to one of the managers up at Sapphire today to ask her kind of about the economic impacts. And this is one of those projects that we can consider to be a private-public partnership with with Sapphire, the private entity, Department of Energy, and USDA have all been partners on this. It's about a $135 million project. They're looking at construction is ongoing right now in Columbus, New Mexico, which I believe has about, I think, maybe 1,500 to 2,000 residents. So when you look at the economic impact of putting in $135 million into that economy, and the direct and the indirect benefits of employment is upwards of about 700 positions. So that's huge when you're looking at some of these small rural communities and the ways that we can help to address some of these economic issues, in along the United States and in the border region. So, real quickly, and we all know what those benefits are for renewable energy, but I'll go over them very briefly. Renewable energy, as we know, it's critical to the energy security of the United States. It's going to be the way that we're able to be less dependent on foreign oils. The second reason is the renewable energy, like sun and wind, they don't produce harmful air emissions. So, it's a clean energy that's at the same time it's inexhaustible. We know it's going to be there tomorrow or years from now. And finally, one of the biggest aspects of renewable energy that I just talked about is the opportunity to create jobs for the border region and for some of our local economies. So with that being said, the U.S.-Mexico border region, I believe, is going to be a key player in how the rest of the United States moves forward with respect to renewable energy and transmission. And Diane, I keep asking Diane some of these questions as we go forward in some of these meetings, but it's a very good report. Now I think I challenge the board to figure out, okay, how do we take it to that next step to actually get some of these important projects done for the border region and for the United States. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert. The point that you make about transmission is very well taken. It's one of the things that people often forget about transmission. People see it as sort of a violation of their line of sight. They see it as big, ugly towers, etc. But you think about the jobs that are created there, and then you think about the fact that you create economic zones around a transmission line. It really is a lifeline in many parts of the world. Maria Elena is our last presenter, Maria Elena Giner, who is the General Manager of the Border Environment Cooperation Commission. I've shared a number of tables with Maria Elena. She's always good fun. And Maria Elena, I've got the good news for you that you have, you have 50 minutes. So I hope you brought a big presentation to us. You never have any problem speaking, so you should be able to fill up that time. Maria Elena, over to you.
Actually, it's kind of funny because people have told me I have no problem speaking, but I have a second child. My oldest child is very reserved, very poised, but my second child, who's 9 years old, she is a talker. And I look at her, I said, where does she get this from? But it's interesting because when she gets down from the car, all of a sudden, everything is quiet. So it's interesting because you say that, and I think, God, where does she get that from? And I think, wow. Well, anyways, Robert, you made a perfect segue for me. I think if we had actually gotten together, it would have actually worked out. It probably wouldn't have worked out. But really, you asked, how are we going to do this? How are we going to achieve what's in the report? And I had, Diane sent me the link for the report a couple days before, and on the plane, just like everybody else, I was reading the report, and I was like, wow, there is some great information here. There's a great information from the perspective of identifying environmental challenges. There's great information in here from the perspective of identifying projects. And there's even better than all of that put together is that there's great information on potential project sponsors, which is a huge challenge for most of us. I have here a presentation here that talks, we've already seen some of this. I'm going to skip over this, what we've done as an institution and our sister agency, what they've funded. But really what this particular graph shows is the evolution of our institution with regards to what our core mission is. We've got water, wastewater, which is the WWW. The SW is the solid waste. WC is water conservation. AC is air quality, and CE is clean energy. And as you can see, from 1995 to 1999, where the core function for us was water, wastewater, and solid waste, it's evolved into other sectors. And in 2006, 2010, solid water, wastewater still continuing trend. Solid waste is a continuing trend. But air quality and clean energy now is a very important part of where our mission is going with regards to our institution and improving the environment. These are the latest pipeline of projects that we have specific to solar energy. We've got about 8 projects right now within our pipeline. This was presented at our board, Michelle, so you get the privilege of seeing it. I'm going to need it later. Yeah. Technical assistance, as I mentioned earlier, is the cornerstone of project development. And as you saw earlier, significant amount of the work that we've done has been in water and wastewater. 34 million of the technical assistance that have been provided have gone to communities in grants for water and wastewater. And we recently did an audit of ourselves, and I do this for the benefit of Randy Hill, who's from the Office of Water, and he doesn't know this, but we recently did an audit of ourselves of where those funds went, and 85% of the funds went to implemented projects. So one of the recommendations that you have here, what I glean to be 6 recommendations directed to us, is on technical assistance for project development. Really, we have become very good at implementing technical assistance to lead to projects that are implemented. You can either say that, or we're very stubborn, we're the dog with the bone, and we're going to make it happen one way or another. But certainly, technical assistance is very critical in order to be able to assist communities in developing projects. The other element that we've also been able to support the energy element of projects is in training. Last year, we had 2 modules of training in climate action planning process for the Mexican states. And so we're actually currently working on 3 climate action plans. What I do want to say is that based on the information that we got from the port, myself and my colleague, Jeronimo Gutierrez at NADMEC, have started to identify opportunities for technical assistance. And in 2011, the Board of 2012, Region 6, we've gotten applications, and it looks like one of them will be funded for our first energy audit on the U.S.-Mexico border. We're also setting aside technical assistance funds to do energy audits in 2 communities in the U.S. and are working right now with the state of Baja California on doing energy audits for the 5 utilities in water and wastewater utilities in Baja California. Again, like I've mentioned before, utilities are your single largest energy consumer in any community, and it's a great opportunity to look at energy efficiency. And that's the 2 institutions are looking at sharing technical assistance and the costs associated with it. Again, recognizing the fact that resources are limited and we want to leverage as much as we can. Again, you've seen this before. This is the greenhouse gas emissions by border states. This is what we've done for the 6 Mexican border states. The red is the energy consumption, and you can see those are the most significant emissions, and again, the gray is the transportation. Now, these are the projects that we have already certified within our pipeline, which are worth highlighting. One is a biodiesel project that we certified in El Paso, Texas. It's an alternative fuels, and it has an installed capacity of 5 million gallons of generating 5 million gallons of biodiesel per year. The other one that we just recently certified is Deputy Assistant Administrator Bob Percisepi mentioned was the one in Picture Rock. This is a 20 megawatt solar park that's in Picture Rock, Arizona, and it's looking at providing 20 megawatts of solar energy to Tucson, and it's actually the 3rd largest solar project in the world. There aren't big solar projects, and so as we hear a lot of numbers coming forward that in the state of, and I saw that in here, that the certain state of California has got 100 megawatt solar. These are huge projects. There are not a lot of big solar projects out there. The other 2 projects that we've also certified is one in Nyland, California, which is 23 megawatts. Actually, this is the 3rd largest one. As you can see, the costs here are confidential. That is one of the challenges that we have had as an institution, is balancing our transparency with patent information and confidential information. So one of the things with costs is that manufacturers do not want out there publicly what their costs are, because then it starts getting into competitive issues and patent issues as far as what their technology costs. And this one, but what we do come out with is saying what the bank is providing is, and going back to the other one, as you can see in the one in Tucson, Arizona, it provided a $91 million loan. Those are huge transactions for us. In the case of Sun Peak, which is the one in Nyland, California, it's 23 megawatts of solar, and it's providing us up to $77 million loan. Again, that's a huge transaction for us. Right now, we also, this one's not certified, the Los Alisos plant. This is a project that we're partnering with EPA and Conagua on. It's to provide it's it's not going to be certified, but it's in the certified category because it is going to be a project that's going to be fully implemented with no NADBank funding, but with a combination of EPA and Conagua project. They didn't put the cost there, but it's about $5 million. It's for 1 megawatt of power, of solar generated power to provide 100% of the energy needs of the Los Alisos wastewater treatment plant. And so that this will be the first one in Latin America. And one of the things that you have as a recommendation here is energy efficiency during project development. This for us is going to be or has been, because we've been working on this for about a year now, has been a great institutional capacity opportunity for us because we start to see what are the challenges. We provided the technical assistance through EPA, or EPA provided it through us, and we managed the grant to see what goes into developing a solar project from zero, from cradle to grave. They're going to be starting construction in January. And it's rumored that President Calderon is going to be coming precisely to highlight this because this is the first one in Latin America. What's the message with regards to one of your recommendations is, one of your recommendations in here is energy efficiency during project development. What we are seeing now on both sides, and I'll highlight Mexico first, and then I'll talk about the U.S., because in Mexico, there's one entity that regulates water, or that regulates and manages water. That's Conagua. And Conagua now, as part of their project development, are circulating the project development, the design details, the planning details through their electromechanical area, which looks at energy efficiencies and transmissions, which looks at energy transmission of water and distribution of water, which look at energy efficiency in the wastewater treatment plants. And so that is something that is very high on Mexico's agenda. With regards to the projects in the U.S., we have been working with EPA Region 6 and Region 9 to look at, whenever we have projects that are being prioritized for funding, to look at accessing PDAP grants for energy efficiency within those utilities, because we recognize the fact that if they have energy efficiencies, then they'll have more capacity to take on loans, and that therefore our grant dollars go a lot further. So that's the second recommendation that we saw within the report that we think will have a great opportunity to challenge. And, this gives us teeth, too. These reports give us teeth, even though I'm preaching to the choir. Trust me, when it's down in writing, it does have a significant impact. These are the projects that we currently have in the pipeline to be certified. So Nix Los Vergeles, this is the one to talk about, is El Porvenir. Los Vergeles is kind of falling back in priority, but El Porvenir is a 54 megawatt wind project in Reynosa. What is the experience that we're having here? This is actually going to be, I believe it's 50 towers, if I'm not mistaken, and it's going to actually be providing energy to Soriana. Soriana is one of the largest chains of grocery stores in Mexico. What experience are we getting here? Is the off-taker experience of generating energy in one area and off-taking it in another area. So what we're doing is that we're working with Conagua on doing identifying opportunities of a similar nature for the water utilities in Mexico, is having them generate their energy in one place and off-taking it in another. And that's why we're focusing right now on Baja California on doing this energy audit. So Keith, if you want to go back to your region and give me some money, I can do a lot with it to look at these off-taker opportunities. And so this is forthcoming. Going to your comment, Duncan, it was interesting. I was with the governor of Tamaulipas not too long ago, and you talk about senators not being aware of this. When I sat down with the governor of Tamaulipas, he knew a lot about Los Vergeles. That's a very state-driven project. And when I sat down, I said, look, but you've got this El Porvenir project. He goes, oh, yeah, but that's private. And so it's a little bit of them understanding that private projects, they're important for them to understand. They're important for them to learn from them when they are applying their state-driven projects. But the reality is that they don't see it as part of them. And that's a challenge that we as a board, or you as a board need to, and we as board of stakeholders need to ensure that Mexican states are understanding that even though it's not a project by them, they have tremendous opportunities to learn as far as being able to build capacity on such an emerging issue. This other project that we have coming up for these two projects are in public comment right now, is this Astrosol project, which again is in Tucson, Arizona. It's a small project. It's a 5 megawatt project. Where this is sponsored by Arizona State University, so their cost is public, $15.9 million, and they're looking at seeking an ad bank loan of up to $13.1 million with an off-taker again of Tucson Electric. This project is looking at 5 different technology. I'm not sure if I'm using the correct term, but different types of photovoltaics or technologies that could build capacity within the university. And so again, that starts to build this capacity that's needed with regards to emerging issues. We also have 2 other projects which haven't gone to public comment, and these are in Texas, in Cameron County. John, this is in your area, and they're of course wind. One is a 200 megawatt Los Vientos 1A, which is a 200 megawatt wind project in Cameron County, and another 202 megawatt wind project, which is the second phase of it, which are by Duke Energy. It's again a privately driven project that's moving very quickly. So I love this picture because this reminds me of Where's Waldo, right? If you look at this picture, as you can see, there is nothing more than you can do to build capacity than to build your own solar panels. This is the back offices, and we installed 2 concentrated photovoltaic sun tracking units with a total capacity of 16 kilowatts. It supplies 35% of our energy needs, and it saves about $15,000 per year. This is a pilot project for us. It is not a moneymaker, I am telling you, because it's only 2 solar panels. Obviously, a lot of the costs associated, or a lot of the benefits associated with construction, is that you can build multiple solar panels. It's not like I can go to rent a unit and rent the equipment that I need for like an hour or 2 hours. I mean, you rent equipment on a monthly basis. So, the installation costs that we had with this were much higher than a solar park, for instance. So if you can see here, I'm going to go through a series of photos, that we learned as far as building this or installing this these solar panels, and we have been tracking it, and there has been significant institutional capacity building. And one of the things that I have learned, because I have talked and preached about it, but when it happens to you, you're like, how did that happen to me? I have this funny story. I used to make fun of people when they used to sit in the wrong row at the airlines, thinking, how can you sit in the wrong row? How can that happen? And then next thing you know, I'm doing that, right? So now I don't make fun of this. But one of the things that I learned with this solar project, is that we as an entity, for us is important is the environment. For us, it's the importance of developing projects and certifying. But let me tell you, we installed these solar panels, and it took us 6 months to figure out, the appropriate way of tracking, the appropriate way of discovering that our inverters were burnt out and they weren't working the first 2 months. And again, we're interested in this. Could you imagine all of this private industry, like industrial parks, where we want to implement distributed solar generation, and they're interested in their widgets, and they're not, it's hard for them to think, outside of their widgets and have that expertise. So we as an institution, learned our lesson with respect to that and are obviously applying it. Other recommendations within the report are to maintain, you are recommending that we maintain our core programs. And for those of you who were not at my presentation earlier, that is exactly what we're doing. The retained earnings that are being generated from the bank through all of these opportunities of loaning. Water and wastewater is not a loaning opportunity, a significant loaning opportunity for the North American Development Bank, but energy projects are. And so for us, any of the loans that we get out will be generating retained earnings. It is the policy of our board that those retained earnings go to sustaining our core programs of water, wastewater, and solid waste. And as many of you saw, and if you didn't see that, we do have some handouts out here that talk about the needs on the U.S. side of about $8.5 billion, and on the Mexican side about $1.5 billion. So there continues to be core water and wastewater needs for first-time service. The other thing that you have in your recommendations are two. One is to undertake a regional assessment for small projects. This is not something that we had budgeted as an item. If this is something that is, it's obviously very important. I highly encourage you, our board member right here, Lisa Almodovar, and as soon as Michelle at the pause walks in, you tackle her and you tell her that this is important, because if they hear it, then they will request us to do a study on the project opportunities, an assessment of project opportunities, of small project opportunities along the U.S.-Mexico border. And then finally, the other recommendation you have here is on looking at our criteria and encouraging project sponsors to use our BEC certification process. Well, with regards to using our BEC certification process, the process we're very proud of. It's a process that adds a significant level of transparency. What you did, what you talked about with regards to selecting land for the solar panel was an important example which we apply to the siting of water and wastewater treatment plants. We do a similar process with respect to that, so we're certainly open to using that. And we have recently updated our certification criteria. It will be going out for public comment, and it has been updated to reflect not just water and wastewater projects, but also to reflect private sector opportunities or project sponsors, and also to reflect energy and the environment, energy and air as well. So when that goes out, we encourage you to take a look at it, because that will be your opportunity to provide us comments on our certification process. With that, I close. I will let you know that I do plan on, we have a senior staff of my senior retreat. And so one of the things that we do plan on doing is going through this report and identifying those potential projects, those potential sponsors, and looking at those environmental highlights that you have on here that we can certainly use in evaluating our projects. Because since you have Lisa Almodovar, I know she will be asking me about this specifically. So Lisa, I tell you right now, we're going to do it. Okay. Thank you, and that concludes my presentation.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Maria Elena. We have some time now for questions and comments. Yes, Cecilia.
Thank you. I just have a comment and a question for Maria Elena. There was a report that just came out on the California Solar Initiative that California just achieved a 1 gigawatt installation, and we have 25,000 jobs in the state in this throughout community level. Because I saw was it Duncan who showed the wind development and how many jobs. And this is all, we're talking about rooftop solar. We're not talking about multi-megawatts built elsewhere. And we're also talking about not building transmission, or not even asking for transmission to be built at all from this 1 gigawatt. And obviously it keeps moving, even now without rebates. My question to you, because I saw what you're doing, and it's, well, as a manufacturer, of course we do, we have like a 50 megawatt plant in Spain or what have you. We do large scale, and I should be agnostic as to who we sell. I do care because of the communities, and especially being in San Diego. And one of the stigmas about the solar initiative for some legislators is for the rich people because it's expensive, although the prices have come down quite a bit. But the question is, how can we bring it to the communities on the border that are not underserved communities? And when I see, 20 megawatts is great, 5 megawatts is great, but the question is there a way for BEC, and I know that that's probably outside what you do, because it's a bit more complicated when you're talking about the size of the system that you did, to be able to help out, I don't know, maybe partner with on-grid energy, or with the state or something on, helping the low-income communities to be able to enjoy the benefits of solar. So I don't know if there's something that maybe we can work a program in
Let me comment a little bit about distributed generation, because that's a passion of mine too, like it is for you, Cecilia. I think distributed generation is a great opportunity to avoid a lot of these environmental issues that are being identified here, and also actually to generate more jobs. The reality is to generate more jobs. About 3 years ago, maybe 4, the BEC certified for financing by the Nad Bank a project, a PACES project, which is Property Assessment Clean Energy Project. And so it's an $80 million loan that was going to be given to Frontera First, which was a company that was out of Berkeley that kind of pioneered that PACES legislation. You know, after the project was certified, it's a project we still have on our dockets, but because of the Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac and Freddie Mae issue, it's, you know, the whole PACES issue seems to have really impacted the ability to do distributed generation by homeowners and small communities. Now, that does not preclude us from doing some of the partnering with other institutions that I saw in San Diego, where a renter could go and, for instance, purchase a portion of a solar panel, which I thought was extremely creative. And Cecilia, you promised me you were going to bring me back a project that had that. So certainly, as soon as you bring it back to me, we'll be very interested in looking at funding, or even how at ways to kind of disseminate that as an example to replicate in other entities. We're certainly very interested, and I would like to pursue that. The other thing that we are pursuing, and this will be our first kind of a brush with respect to that, is that the state of Baja California, from the perspective of the Mexican border states, is probably is the leader as far as what they're doing in terms of energy, because they have a commission that's already been an energy commission that's been operating for several years. And they have approached us on doing distributed generation at the malls, at places where they have high security, because the issue with them doing it at the homes is the vandalism and some of the challenges that go along with that. So we're actually working with them on developing they've already identified one major mall. They've got 3 other ones that they want to work with, as well as the university, at doing a project that's about 5 megawatts that goes to that. And so that will be where we really have good experience. Now, what has all of these historical mega projects brought us? What it's really brought for us, especially the North American development, is experience in the PPAs, or the power purchase agreements. Having good power purchase agreements is very critical in order to have a successful project. That experience we're going to share with the state of Baja California, because they're going to have to they're going to be taking on the credit themselves, and it's going to be a power purchase agreement with the malls, with the 2 universities, and with any other off-takers that they're envisioning with that. So we're actually looking at using that experience. So I think we're headed in that direction, Cecilia. And on the U.S. side, I mean, I'd be more than happy to meet with the people that I know were identified in that San Diego meeting, which was one of the project sponsors that was identified here.
Yes, please.
David Henkel from New Mexico. I know we, in preparing this report, both in our own discussions and also in the public comments that we received, touched on some areas which weren't quite so positivist. We've been presenting this report because we believe that there are tremendous benefits to be had from the renewable energies that we've explored. But there were also some cautionary notes. And while they're referred to, obviously we don't dwell on all the difficulties in the report, because that doesn't sell well. But frankly, one of the things that I'm curious about is how we, going forward, can address a couple of these issues. And I think that anybody could answer them, but I think that I'd like to hear Keith, because I haven't met Keith before. And also Steve, because of his take on the state role. And here's how I'd like to frame it. One of the comments, we heard this with regard to wind energy and other things in California, and we've heard this from other folks in New Mexico, or I have personally, that the offside or the downside of some of the developments may in fact be threatening habitats. It may in fact be earth tremors from large wind programs. It may in fact be water drawdowns from biofuels programs or from biomass programs. And people haven't really mentioned contamination, and I'm not raising that now, but there are always these issues that we're concerned with vital resources. And so I guess and then also I'll tack on something in a moment. So the question is, what is the nature of our procedure here so that as we investigate and try to get people excited and supportive of such projects, recognize that we are being responsible and also considering the environmental impacts and engaging the public in a participatory way so the public doesn't think they're just being steamrolled, that they can in fact learn from the process and we can learn from their concerns, not just in our hearings but as we investigate individual projects. And then the other piece which also tacks on here is there is an implication for land use planning, which is quite varied between the states and different levels of authority. And it's different in Mexico, too, for that matter. But in the United States, we have different land use planning authorities and responsibilities. And so it complicates this matter somewhat, not just in terms of what land suitability and impact, but also there are market questions here, and then there are questions of appeal and quasi-judicial elements in all of this. So I guess the real question is what procedures are realistic for us to safeguard the public, to increase public education and awareness, and also garner public support.
Thank you, David. Just before you guys respond to that, I mean, it's a really good point, I think, and I think perhaps we can learn here from what the traditional energy sector is moving towards. And you see what Exxon is engaged in right now, a public information campaign about fracking for shale gas, recognizing the environmental concerns, recognizing there are real issues at work, and then saying, well, we think we've found a way to beat this problem. And I think that level of transparency about recognizing that there are negative aspects on renewable energy is something we need to do, because I don't know how many renewable energy conferences I've been to, but everybody says this is the technology that is the thing. I said, well, hang on a second, because I know that next year I'm going to hear another new technology. And so a level of honesty and disclosure, I think, is absolutely necessary. Keith, would you like to begin?
Oh, it just comes out when I talk. Okay. Well, actually, I'm glad you asked that question because it's not necessarily a mixed message. It's really two messages, right? So EPA clearly supports renewable energy, but there's another part of what we do. So one process I can talk about is NEPA. I'm from Region 9. So Region 9 has California, Arizona, Nevada, and Hawaii. So we have a lot of the renewable projects within our region. And since a lot of them either involve federal money or they're on federal land, they have to go through the NEPA process. So right now we actually have 9 projects on federal land that we are reviewing. And our focus has been energy efficiency, which was one of the things that was mentioned in your report, but also smart site selection and minimizing potential environmental impacts. So that is definitely a process that can be used to monitor the other side of these great renewable energy projects. A related one, we were talking about tribal land earlier, and I think the question earlier was renewable energy projects on tribal land. The other thing that we've learned is that often these renewable energy projects are on BLM land that are not on tribal land. But since often tribal land is near BLM land, there are historic tribal resources on this BLM land that might impact tribal land. And again, this is a place where the NEPA process can help bring to light the other impacts of renewable energy projects. One of the other point that was made in the report is better coordination between the federal agencies, actually all government agencies on renewable energy. One of the things that we did in our region is we signed an MOU with BLM because we realized we were often clashing with BLM when we were reviewing these projects. We wanted to make sure that we were keeping each other informed of all the projects we knew about, and there were no surprises. We don't always agree, but we wanted to make sure there were no surprises, so we signed that MOU. Before I turn it over to Steve, I actually had one more thought listening to Maria Elena. If we can convert her enthusiasm into energy, we would have the greatest renewable energy source that we've ever discovered.
Thanks. Thank you, Keith. Do I get to talk now? I'm just acting like I get to talk. So, one of the questions I wrote down, Dave, was what is the procedure to recognize the procedure? So I know I wrote the question down incorrectly, but I think it's like you saw in the report. You know, we recognize that you can't just go do things willy-nilly. You've got to have some prior consultation. And I think, you know, the point Evaristo made about consulting with the tribes when in doubt, I think it's a real key point. One of the things that is really kind of unique about Texas among Western states, and we're just unique, period, is that, you guys know it, all you Texans know it, you non-Texans know it too, is that most of our lands are not, when we joined the Union, our lands were not federal lands. Most of our land is private, whereas other Western states, most of their lands are federal. And so when you do these projects, they're typically running through private land. And so you've got to get the consent of the landowners, or else there's a huge problem. So I think, you know, for better or for worse, that's the problem, is we don't develop these projects as the state. And sometimes we have incentives, or sometimes, I think we referenced it in the report, one of our fellow state agencies, the General Land Office, they say, hey, we've got some RFPs for wind tower or what have you, but it's basically a private developer, and then they've got to work with the neighboring folks to say, hey, we want to do this, but we've got to run this transmission line through here. But, you know, what you found in a lot of these projects, especially wind energy projects, is these people love it because it's like a new windfall. It's like drilling for oil again. Suddenly, they're getting returns for just having a wind turbine up there. Now, their neighbors have to put up with it, and they got to deal with that. But I think it's the private sector that's having to reach out to these folks to make sure that they don't antagonize anyone. And I know that's one of the issues, talking about transmission lines. We've got this huge project to, I think, come up with another $18 billion worth of transmission lines. And that's billion with a B. B as in boy, and that's a lot of money. And so I'm already paying, I think, now for transmission lines that aren't even built yet. They're already tacking that bill, tacking that onto my bill, my electric bill. And there are a lot of folks who aren't happy about the way the transmission lines are going to run. But that's, I mean, if we want to move towards that, we've got to come to some kind of agreement. And it's one of these things where you've got to talk. People have to sit down and talk. So I don't know. I think, you know, the recommendations in the report are really sound ones and good ones. And, you know, we heard from folks, the woman from the Audubon Society who came and spoke about what's happening in New Mexico. And, you know, I think you can't say no, you know, and we had these discussions ourselves, like, can we make requirements for renewable energy permits more onerous than for a regular permit? And I think the answer was no. But, you know, we want to make sure that they're done in a way that's smart and sensible. So I don't know. I don't know if I answered all your questions or not. But.
Well, please.
Just to note that the Texas case is unique because of the nature of private land. And you guys don't have the kind of land use planning processes that the other three states do. So just as we have differences between Mexico and the U.S. in these processes, there are differences between our states, which you pointed to before. So it's very helpful to hold it up. Thank you.
A last call for questions? Yes, please.
So thank you. I was just going to remark, and I was hoping that Steve would actually hit on the board's perspective. At least some of the board members felt that when it comes down to the project development phase, as Evaristo mentioned, it's clearly important, at least from a tribal perspective, consultation, but it's also equally important consultation with private homeowners, Steve. I mean, we do, at least we think we do a fair job in letting them know what's going on, but I think we don't do as effective job, on the other hand, in listening to them what their concerns are. And the board heard from other citizens that feel that they're being negatively impacted, not to disagree a little bit with the economic benefits by some of these projects, not just environmentally, but also physically. And I think it bears to mention, and I'm hoping that as these projects move forward, some of the board members felt that there should be an emphasis on engaging these people at the earliest stage possible, not just to tell them, but actually to listen to what their concerns are. because there are people with sincere fears and certainly evident impacts. Thank you.
Duncan, do we have time for one more question? There's a woman in there.
We have time for one more question, yes. I will make the time. I will be magnanimous.
Thank you for your presentations, and it's actually a question for Ms. Guinea. Guinea, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing it properly. I represent Entrust Global Investments Company, which is actually now raising a fund to become a link between the capitals and the renewable energy in rural and indigenous communities. So I was actually interested in the projects you were talking about. What is the strategy to find those projects? And how do you usually fund them? Are they mostly loans, or do you deal also with the investments to private projects? So that's it.
The renewable sector is a very new sector for us. So one of the things that the way we've been able to target some of these projects is that we're still building credibility. And so by building that credibility, we're out there on the ground finding projects and begging project sponsors to look at us as a player within it. And as we've done the first 3 projects, we met the expectation. Now we're having a little bit more project sponsors come to us. In fact, at our last board meeting in San Antonio, we have 2 a year. I was amazed. We must have had, I'd say, a good 7 project sponsors that were coming to us interested in looking at projects. One of them was tribal, and one of them was from the Canadian-U.S. border that was basically saying the gaming industry is not an industry we want to be anymore. We want to look at opportunities for our indigenous or our tribal communities in the renewable sectors because of the lands available or the opportunities through the tribes. So how do we start? Typically, we start with project sponsors coming to us, ask us for funding, and it's all loans. It's all loan funding. Right now, there's no grants, but what makes the projects to a certain degree bankable is that these project sponsors are very familiar with the subsidies that are available and also the tax credits that are available. So that's what makes them bankable. What we do bring, which kind of adds to some of the discussion that you had, Angel, was that one of the things that we do also see with private sponsors, not all of them, but certainly a lot of them, is that they are there to implement their projects and not necessarily always take the best interests of the community. And that's what we bring to the table, is helping them balance that out. We've had project sponsors that have come to us and asked us, help us go get through the public participation process so that we don't have those boycotts and those, because they're going to come sooner or later. You either do it earlier or you do it later. And if you do it later, you're so far into it, you've spent all this money. And so the reality is that you do it sooner. And that's one of the things that we've been able to work with project sponsors into convincing them to do it sooner. Did I answer your question? Okay.
So EPA doesn't have the funds to construct these large-scale renewable energy projects, but under the Border 2012 program, and I hope under the Border 2020, we can fund small demonstration projects. So just in Border 2012, we funded a small solar array and retrofitted classrooms with LED lights in Sonora. We funded a small solar array to power a drinking water conveyance system on the Tohono O'odham Indian Reservation. So we do have the ability to kind of provide seed money for demonstration projects.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to make a comment before we finish? No? Well, I would like to, first of all, congratulate everybody here on the panel. Thank you so much for your comments, your enthusiasm. I'd like to congratulate the board itself. Congratulations to Diane as well for putting together this report. Very well done. And I'd like to make a brief comment that, as I've pointed out to some of you on the board over the past year or so, you know, it's sad that Mexico doesn't have the equivalent of this. And it's something that I think on a bilateral basis and from Mexico City I'm going to be pushing for to see if Mexico can actually create its own Good Neighbor Environmental Board that would produce a mirror report on an annual basis. And I know that at times in the past there have been talks about doing this, but it hasn't happened. On behalf of the Mexico Institute, of the Wilson Center, on behalf of the Good Neighbor Environmental Board, thank you very much for all being here this afternoon, and happy holidays to everybody. Many thanks. Bye.